Everybody, welcome back to our stress talk. Let's run real quick through what we covered yesterday, just real quick. We talked about how stress is caused by our nervous system and endocrine system working together to cause changes. It's an automatic response that it's required. You have to have the stress response to survive. People who don't have a stress response actually die pretty young, and so it's definitely something that's natural. But we react to both good and bad stresses in the same way. So a good stress is something we predispose our brains to, or prepare our brains to accept in a good way, like accepted risks like riding a roller coaster or competing in sports. Bad stress is anything that you are not predisposed to enjoy. So taking on too many classes at once, being in a dangerous situation, etc., etc. So a stressor, you'll hear me talk about stressors a lot, is something that causes stress. And that means anything that moves you out of homeostasis. It could be a new job, it could be marriage, a baby, going to school, being broke, an emergency happening, anything that causes your brain to suddenly kick on that stress response so that you're going to start paying attention and getting out of that stress is a stressor, okay? So, I'm not going to spend too much time. We talked a little bit about neurons and neurotransmitters. You don't need to know every single neurotransmitter. This is just kind of a way to get you thinking about what these words mean when you hear them mentioned in advertising. If you go to the doctor and they talk about serotonin or dopamine, etc., now you kind of have an idea of what those things are. We talked a little bit about the endocrine system and what it's doing. It's more than just sex steroids. It also includes adrenaline and the stress hormone cortisol. Homeostasis, that's the maintenance of your body to make sure you're always maintaining your certain healthy set point. Yeah, okay, we'll keep going. We'll go back to that. We talked about how the nervous system is more than just your brain. You have your central nervous system that is the brain and spinal cord. Your peripheral nervous system is everything else. So that's all the nerves that go from your brain and spinal cord to the rest of your body to control digestion, to feel things around you, etc., to see things, etc. We break that down into two parts. Okay, so there's two divisions of the peripheral nervous system. The somatic is anything you can control consciously, while the autonomic is everything that's is being taken care of by the brain without you having to think about it. So if your heart rate increases, if you digest food, that's going to be taking care of the autonomic system. It basically means automatic. It automatically takes care of itself. So that includes if you're just hanging out, not stressed out, your parasympathetic system is activated, and so that's what we lovingly call the rest and digest system. So you're not stressed out, you're resting your body, you're not pushing it beyond its homeostatic levels. On the other hand, your sympathetic nervous system is what gets activated when your central nervous system perceives a stressor. It automatically tells the peripheral to get ready for action because stress is happening. We need to get away from it. Okay, so then we stopped on this. Don't worry about this. I'm not even sure if everyone's still. Well, we won't even talk about it. Let's go on. Let's talk about the typical stress response. Okay, so the very first stress response, part of the stress response, is called the alarm stage. This is when you're, and let me make it, boom. Okay, so the fight, flight, or freeze. So fight or flight is easy to say because it rhymes. And in humans, we talk about how there's actually fight, flight, or freeze. In other animals, are fight, flight, freeze, and reproduce, or the other F word. A lot of animals, when they're stressed out, they will suddenly reproduce because it might be their last chance to have babies. Humans don't do that so much. Our reproductive system tends to shut down under too much stress. The idea being, why am I going to try and have a baby, which takes 9 months before being born, if I might not even survive the day? Okay, so our stress system, if you're in chronic stress, will tend to shut those things, not shut those things down, that's a bad way to say it. You're less likely to become, to have a healthy pregnancy if you are very stressed, okay? So, but on the other hand, reproduction, if you're already pregnant and you're stressed, your body tries really hard to make sure you maintain your fetus before your own health, because that's just how biology runs. It's very complicated. We'll get into it later. But let's talk about this response. So whenever the system is called the fight or flight system because this is what tells you you need to fight whatever stressor is happening, you need to run away from the stressor, or in many cases, and this is not a bad thing, you just freeze and you stop and you're trying to assess the situation to see maybe the situation will go away. Maybe I can handle it a different way. Let's just see what happens. And that's that freeze response. Let's see. So this happens when your brain perceives a stress and it triggers the release of adrenaline. So that adrenaline rush, you feel that rush, and what that is adrenaline telling endorphins, hey, turn on. We need to feel as awesome as possible so we can get away from this situation. Okay, because your body wants you to get away. And awesome might not be the best word. If you're predisposed to enjoy a stressor, like riding a roller coaster, the endorphin rush makes you feel good when adrenaline gets kicked in. If you are in a scary situation or a bad situation of any kind, if your stressor is negative, your brain is predisposed to make you pay attention, feel bad, and get away from the situation because it's not a good situation. Okay? So your body is prepared to fight or flee or freeze. Your body, and so what does that mean? That means that you want to, if you need to fight or flee, your muscles become activated. And so a lot of times people, when they're stressed, they feel really tense, and it's because your muscles are all clenching because they want you to run away. Because your brain doesn't understand the difference between a lion about to eat you and your taxes being due. To your brain, they're both stressors, which are both bad, and you need to get away from them or fight them. Okay, so what does the nervous system do in this case? It increases your blood pressure and your heart rate. This causes your breath to get faster, and what that does is it causes you to move oxygen to, so when your breath is quickening, or you are taking in more oxygen. If you're increasing your blood pressure and your heart rate, you're moving oxygen around your body a lot. Okay, so this is bad when it's persisting, when you have high blood pressure for a long time, because that blood pressure is being shoved through vessels, your arteries and your veins, that are not used to such high pressure, and they start to break down over time. So that's why high blood pressure, it's okay in certain, like tiny amounts, like when you're on a roller coaster. It's bad for sustained periods because it starts to break down and you get clots. It breaks down your system and you get clots. It can go to your brain and cause aneurysms or strokes, and it can go other places and cause embolisms. So your skeletal muscles are tense. Those are anything that are attached to the skeleton, which you can control yourself. That means it's basically because your body is getting ready to, am I going to have to fight something? Am I have to run away from something? Am I going to have to catch something? What's happening? My muscles are ready to do a thing. Okay? You then you release stored energy into your blood. So this is where your liver is going to start releasing sugar that it stores as glycogen. It releases as glucose into the blood system. This means there's lots of glucose ready. So if your muscles start to get tired, there's lots more glucose to take it up. Okay. Oh, let me go back a second and talk about heart rate and blood pressure and breathing. Sometimes when people get really stressed out, they start to hyperventilate. So to hyperventilate means to breathe too much. And this is kind of like when your body gives you a fever. So your body says, hey, you know what's good? Killing bacteria or viruses with heat. And so you increase in temperature. But then it's like, well, if a little heat is good, a lot of heat is awesome. When actually that's bad for you. So that's what a fever is. If you are breathing too quickly, and your heart rate is too fast and your blood pressure is too high, your blood is moving through your body so quickly that you can't use any of that oxygen, and you start to get lightheaded, and you're actually working against yourself. So oftentimes when people are hyperventilating, if they're having such an intense stress response or maybe even a panic attack, you give them something to breathe into for several reasons. One is to have them focus on something. So if you're focusing on something external, like breathing into a bag, you can't focus on the stressor as much. Another thing is, as they're breathing into the bag, they're using up the oxygen in the bag, and it causes the stress response to, well, how do I describe this? It turns it off a little bit because they're not getting as much oxygen, and so your brain has to, it just basically turns the system off because they get lightheaded in a way that makes them take deeper breaths. We'll get into it more later. You also, again, you start sweating a lot because if your muscles are tense, they're using a lot of energy. They're breaking down that sugar so they can get moving. When you break down sugar, you're going to be releasing energy in that bond energy, and it gets really hot. You don't want to overheat because you will break down. Many bad things happen when you're overheating. So you start sweating to get rid of that excess heat. You move blood away from the surface of your skin. So part of that is if you take an injury, you're not going to bleed out as much. And part of it is it's just one of the things that happens. You start making more red blood cells. So your bone marrow starts to make red blood cells. What that does is it says, hey, we're bringing in a bunch more oxygen by breathing faster. Let's make sure we have something around that can pick up that oxygen. So red blood cells are the cells that carry oxygen around the body. You start to let's see what I'm talking about. So adrenaline's going to cause your clotting proteins to go up, and it takes less time to clot. So it's taking less time to clot because you've moved blood cells away from the surface of your skin, but there's a lot of clotting proteins around, so any blood that is there can clot very quickly. So in the skin, you're clotting very quickly. But in your deeper vessels, there's less clotting proteins. There's still an abundance of clotting proteins. I'm trying to think of how in depth to go in here. The problem with this is there's lots of clotting proteins happening. It's easier to clot, like it'll clot faster. That's bad if you have bad blood pressure all the time, because you start to develop clots within your veins and arteries, which can then be very dangerous. We'll talk about that a lot later. Let's look at this pretty picture. So this is what's happening during the stress response. The sympathetic system gets turned on, and the parasympathetic system. So normally, you have a lot of motility happening in your guts. Your guts are moving, digesting food, moving things around, getting rid of waste. Your bladder you can go pee if you need to, etc. You're secreting acids in your stomach so you can digest things, and your heartbeat is slow and regular, and your bronchioles are just the things that take in air are just, normal. When you start to go into the stress response, your pupils will dilate, okay? So this is pointing at part of the brain constricting. I don't know what it's actually trying to say here, but your pupils dilate. They get bigger, okay? So they get bigger because you want to take in as much light as possible so you can assess your situation as much as possible. Because I see that the color here is the different. I see. So the blue, during parasympathetic system, your eyes can be constricted. They're going to be smaller than normal. During the sympathetic system, during a stress response, they dilate. They get really big. So this can also happen. This can be a trigger if you see someone or something that you really, really like, your eyes tend to dilate. Because again, you're taking in as much of the situation as possible. You're really looking at it. Okay? But that doesn't mean if you look at someone, like if you look at your husband and his pupils are very, very constricted, that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. That just means that there might be a lot of light in the room. So don't take that as being the true symbol of if someone loves you or not. What else happens while you are in parasympathetic? While you're in rest and digest, you secrete saliva because you need it to digest food. That's a first step in chemical digestion. Okay, when you are stressed out, you stop secreting saliva because you need to conserve that water for other things. Okay, and you're not digesting food, so a lot of times when you get stressed out or nervous, your mouth gets really dry and it just feels oh my god, it's so dry and scary. So what's happening there is you're not secreting saliva because you're stressed out. Okay, because adrenaline is causing that effect. So then you dilate your bronchioles. So these are I think I said these are your bronchioles. They're when you go in, so this is the trachea, the tube that brings air into your lungs. It splits into the two bronchi, and then within there it splits into a lot more tubes called bronchioles. If they are dilated, if they're bigger, they can take in more air. Okay, so one thing, if you have asthma, a lot of times these are what are going to get constricted during an asthma response. So when you use an inhaler, it's a form of a stress hormone that actually causes the dilation of the bronchioles. So you're literally putting stress hormone right on a very specific part of your body that needs the stress action to happen. And we'll talk about how we actually use a lot of things that way. We do a lot of things with that. Like I said, you speed up your heartbeat, you start secreting a lot of adrenaline. Well, you are secreting adrenaline, that's why this is all happening. You start decreasing digestive fluids because you don't need them. Your body says, why am I going to digest that sandwich if I might die in a second? Because in your brain, everything's either fine and dandy or about to kill you. And that's how evolution has led us to be how successful we are. Okay, so since you are not digesting, you don't your muscle action and your digestive system stops, and you depending on how stressed you are, you normally in a normal response, you don't have to pee. In normal stress response, you don't feel like you have to urinate, and you don't feel like you have to defecate. You don't have to poop. You don't have to pee. In major stress responses, where your body's like, "Oh my God, we could die any moment," you will lose control of your bladder and your intestine because your body says, "Let's make ourselves as fast as possible and as light as possible." And so you just release the sphincters holding these in control, okay? There was a case where I used to live in Austin, Texas, and there was a lady who had reported a bank robbery. And she said, "Oh my God, these guys came in. I can describe them. Here's this, here's that." And she's talking to the police, and they said, "Oh, but we saw you on the security camera taking the money out of the safe and then burying it behind the bank." And she looked at them and suddenly defecated. She just was so stressed out that she just got caught that she pooped her pants right there in the interrogation room. So and she obviously did not mean to do it. It's just she was so stressed out that she got caught, and she was already nervous anyway, that it just happened because her brain said, "You have to run." But obviously you can't run in that situation, so you can't tell your body not to do a thing that it's going to automatically do. Okay, moving on. So like I said, when the sympathetic system is on, the parasympathetic turns off. So again, your mouth gets really dry. You're not going to have digestive enzymes. So a lot of times if you're really stressed out, you can have an upset stomach because you stop digesting mid-digestion, basically. So you have an imbalance of those acids and other things in your stomach. You don't contract the muscles in your gut, so you're not digesting. Many other things. Let's keep going. So why is this good? Okay, you become more alert. You're more aware of danger. Not only that, if you're alert and aware of danger, like you hear people say, like, "I don't know what came over me, but suddenly everything became like very clear," or "Suddenly I knew someone was watching me." So what happens a lot of times, we don't even understand what cues we're taking in, that our brain is like, "Oh my God, danger." So it could be that you smell something, or like you smell a person, you don't realize you're smelling them. You smell the testosterone on them because they're aggressive, or you smell I don't know, just something. You hear a noise that is like slightly different, and it causes you to become alert. You get that rush of adrenaline. Once when I was in college, I was studying late at night, and I suddenly knew something was happening. I was in my apartment. I didn't know what was happening. I went and peeked out my peephole, and there was someone looking in through my window at me. Oh, so scary. And what happened was, I didn't realize until later, but I heard them take the screen off my window. They did it really quietly, but they did something that made a little bit of a noise. My brain picked up on it, even though I couldn't identify what it was. I didn't even know I'd heard it until later, and that's when I was like, something's happening, what's happening? And I became really alert, okay? Nothing bad happened. It was just scary. So why is this good? For other reasons, it keeps you, if you're aware of your situation and your environment, a lot of times this is really good. It makes you realize, don't step into the intersection, there's a car coming. Don't eat this thing, it smells kind of weird, it might be bad for you, etc. Okay, so this is a good response. But too much stress is really bad for us, okay? So there is what's called general anxiety disorder, or GAD, and this is where your adrenaline response is always active, and once your adrenaline response has been on for 5 minutes, you start to go into your cortisol response. So adrenaline is that neurotransmitter that makes you active right away, and you're ready for action, but it wears off really quickly, okay? So when what happens next is, if adrenaline has been active for 5 minutes, and it's weird that that's a like general really good amount of time you can measure on somebody, and it's across many different species, all the birds and mammals, we give them about 5 minutes before we realize that they're no longer in their adrenaline response, they're now in the cortisol response. So cortisol is the hormone, it's a steroid hormone that causes long-term changes in physiology, because, oh my God, the stress is happening so much, we have to change tactics and get even more sneaky at fighting it, okay? So if that stress response is on too much, you get general anxiety disorder, which is where you are alert and aware of danger all the time, even if there is no danger. So anxiety is this constant alertness. You're always worried that you're going to say the wrong thing. You're always worried that everyone's going to hate you, etc., etc. And it's one of these things that people get really, you're always worried that people are going to worry about you. And it's one of these things you always have to tell people, it's not a bad thing to have this. It's just you're hyper aware of your environment all the time. And it's just a flaw in chemistry, not personality. Okay, so this is something that can be easily, well, depending, it can be treated with medication. And so if somebody is diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, they can often go in and get either you can do talk therapy, or you can do medication, or you can do some combination, and you can't cure it, but you can treat it so that you know how what's happening with your biology, and then maintain your psychological health as a result. Okay, when you have too much of this kind of thing in different ways, like all of a sudden maybe your body doesn't respond, and then suddenly boom, it responds to this huge stress response, that's a panic attack. Okay, and so a lot of people get panic attacks, especially as their stress load increases and increases and increases, and their body is just like, you know what, I've been telling you to become more alert, I've been telling you to run away and fight and whatever, and I just can't handle it anymore, and you just kind of break down. Okay, so some people experience panic attacks as like hyper paranoia, followed by muscle spasms and problems breathing, etc. They come across in different ways. I have a friend who didn't realize he was even having a panic attack. He just said, wow, I'm really twitchy, I can't stop twitching, I can't breathe very well, and I feel really dizzy. And someone said, oh yeah, your skin is really pale, your eyes are huge, you're either on drugs or you're having a panic attack. And it turns out he was not on drugs, he was in fact having a panic attack. Now he's on medication to control his panic attacks, and he's having a much better time. Yeah, okay, let's keep going. So chronic stress, so if you experience we always experience stress. It happens. Every day you're probably stressed at least once, okay? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when you do it constantly that it becomes a problem, and you get stuff like anxiety disorder and panic attacks. If your stressor never goes away, you develop chronic stress. If you have increased breathing for too long, you end up with respiratory problems. If you have increased heart rate and blood pressure for too long, it's like if you have a hose and you crimp it for too long so that the water comes out faster, you start to build up junk inside the hose, and then you start to break the hose where that crimp is, okay? So once you wear down your vessels for too long, you start to build up cholesterol and those clotting proteins that we were just talking about. You can end up having a heart attack, and we're going to talk about that. You use up all of basically you have all this available glucose all the time, and your cells are like, dude, why are you giving me so much? I'm not going to pay attention to any of it anymore, and you can get type 2 diabetes. Okay, which leads to many problems that we'll talk about, if you're alert, if your brain is just hyper alert all the time, you can get anxiety, or you can go the opposite way and get depression. And many people experience both of these things at the same time, where you're hyper aware, but you're exhausted all the time. Again, anxiety and depression, all of these things, these are flaws in chemistry and not flaws in personality. And we're really starting to get this as a society, where we realize mental health is just as important as physical health, and we need to treat it like when someone has a broken leg, you don't tell them to walk it off. That's literally the worst thing you can do. When someone is depressed, we don't tell them, why don't you just feel better? Because you literally can't. It's just your brain has decided we could die at any moment. We're always so stressed out. And you can't just turn that off, okay? There are a lot of things you can do to help your brain get out of it, but you can't just say, okay, today I'm going to feel better. It does help to try and put yourself in a positive frame of mind, but it's really hard to get to that point, so it does take a lot of help. One of the things we didn't specifically talk about is that when you're stressed out, one thing that can stress you out is an invader in your body, like a bacteria, a virus, a fungus, a parasite, something like that, and so you go into a stress response to fight that parasite or virus or anything. If you have increased if your immune system is active for too long because of the stress system, the immune system fails because it uses up all of its resources, or you start to attack your own body. So a lot of autoimmune disorders that you develop as you get older tend to be things that your body is so stressed out, it doesn't even know what to fight anymore, so it fights itself. Okay, all right. So when you're stressed out, your body says, well, we don't need to reproduce right now because we might die. So you can end up with, if you're stressed out chronically, you could end up with major reproductive issues. You can end up with obesity because your body's not handling sugar well, etc. Too long, didn't read. What are you talking about, crazy woman? When your body is focused only on defense, it cannot heal and grow. Okay, that's really important. If your body is constantly waiting for the next horrible thing to happen, you don't sleep well. Remember, that's all of your growth and healing happens when you're sleeping, and everything is on such high alert trying to fight something that it cannot help itself. It can't heal itself. That's just, it's all a product of evolution, and it's not the best system, but it's what got us to where we are today. And this is just scary, scary dinosaur. This isn't accurate. It should have wings. Over time, this scary, scary predator has become things like canaries. Okay, moving on. So, animals in the wild never experience chronic stress. So take a second to think about why that might happen. Why? Because if an animal experiences chronic stress, it's going to get eaten. Okay, so if a zebra, there's a book called Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's by my favorite biologist, Robert Sapolsky. He does a lot of really good talks. I highly suggest you check him out. And he talks about how zebras never get ulcers. Zebras don't get depression. Because if a zebra is experiencing chronic stress, they can't run away from the lion that is chasing them. Okay, so they never experience chronic stress. However, we do, because our stressors are not lions chasing us. Our stressors are essays and tests and other things. And we put ourselves in these situations because of society and because we want to move further in our jobs and our education. And it's just a part of being human. We also see that social hierarchy can cause stress. We see this in animals. We see this in animals other than humans, and we also see it in humans. I have a dog and a cat. Whenever I have a dog and two cats, and so whenever one cat is mad at the other cat, she will swipe at that cat, and if that cat he can't swipe back at her because she's the alpha, so he instead goes and he swipes at my dog, and then my dog doesn't know what's happening because he's an idiot, but that's a different story. So you see this in animals. So again, Robert Sapolsky talks about how when you look at monkey troops or bonobo troops, the top monkey and the very bottom monkey, or they're not monkeys, they're apes, hello. The very top ape and the very bottom ape are the two that are the least stressed out, because and it seems very weird. Why would the bottom ape, on the guy who's getting beat up on the most, be less stressed than someone who's in the middle? Well, the person in the bottom knows exactly what's going to happen. They're never worried, am I going to lose my status today? Am I going to get enough food today? So we experience this as humans. So whenever we're worried about what's blah blah saying about me, do I have enough Instagram likes, am I going to get a date? Any kind of social interactions, those can be incredibly stressful. And it's one of these things that it takes a long time to figure it out. And also, especially when you're in your early 20s, your brain, your prefrontal cortex is still developing. So it's especially stressful then. You don't know exactly who you are yet. Your brain's still figuring it out. It's still making all the neural connections. And so it becomes really, you take a lot of things very seriously. And by taking things seriously like that, you are giving yourself way too much stress. Okay, and I say that as if I don't do that. I do it all the time. I have to erase text messages, or else I will sit there and just look at them and be like, what did he mean when he said to this and not with? You can't do that to yourself, because you will increase your stress to a point that you get chronic stress. Okay. Moving on. Let's keep going. So there's Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Fantastic book. Highly suggest it. Why isn't this? There we go. All right. So if you look at stress by region, what do people worry and stress about the most? So you see that, interestingly, you see different amounts. So in the East, this is all in the U.S. So money stresses people out the most on the East Coast, whereas us West Coasters, apparently we don't worry about it as much as people on the East Coast. What do we worry about on the West Coast more than that? Well, look, we tend to have less stress in general on the West Coast. Interesting. The East Coast tends to stress out a whole lot more. Weird. But let's see what the things we stress out about are. I don't see lions here anywhere. All of these things are things that we have to worry about as humans, but they aren't things that directly will kill us, right? And so, unless you have a specific personal health concern, etc. So again, we're very different from these zebras that don't get chronic stress because they will die. But we have to instead be like, well, how am I going to deal with stuff like the economy or job stability? It's going to stress me out and stress me out. And we know now if you keep getting stressed out, you'll get so sick you can die. And so that's why all of our major causes of death in the U.S. tend to be stress related. Okay, again, we react the same way to mortgages as we do charging predators because evolution. All right, so let's talk about some symptoms of stress. So we tend to, did I do this wrong? I did this wrong. All right. So some symptoms of stress include irritability and anger, nervousness, fatigue, feeling depressed or sad, lack of energy, interest, or motivation, headaches, feeling like you're going to cry, muscle tension, etc., etc., etc. And then how we have these things called maladaptive coping behaviors. So we feel like this. So what do we do to make ourselves feel better? Because remember, our brain is all about reacting and getting a reward. Okay, so we put ourselves. One of the things we're doing in this class is identifying our habits and our reward systems and changing them so that we, instead of giving ourselves like, if we feel let's find like we're gonna cry, we're not gonna always go straight to drinking a lot. Okay, because that is a bad cycle. Okay, so. Sorry, I got a weird text, so don't look at it. Too much stress. If you're feeling nervous or anxious, do you then smoke a cigarette or weed? If you are really angry, do you immediately isolate yourself so that you don't get mad at someone and hit them or something? All of these things are maladaptive coping behaviors, which seem like the easy reward. They're very easy rewards. Like suddenly eating an entire bag of potato chips seems so happy and good. I could eat 3 cupcakes because I'm just having such a bad day. Well, it makes you feel good right away, but the long-term effect is bad, okay? And the long-term effect can then lead to more stress. So our reactions to chronic stress are probably making our chronic stress worse. And so that is, again, something you can consider when you're considering making healthier choices in your life. All right, move on. Hello. Okay, so another fun fact is sometimes your stress is so not your fault because a lot of studies have shown that how you're raised can affect how you deal with stress later in life. And when you're talking about something like rats where they have babies once every like 3 months or something. So if a mom rat is in a bad stressful situation, she's going to be a bad mom for whatever reason. She doesn't take care of her pups. And whereas a good mom and healthy for a rat, an environment with lots of food that's very safe and no predators, she's going to take care of her kids as much as possible because then they'll grow up and move her genes on down through the system. A bad mom means in the rat situation is barely surviving herself, so why is she going to spend a lot of energy on her pups? Interestingly, you can take these babies and switch them. So you can take the good mom, and give her the babies of the bad mom, and the babies that were genetically related to this mom, but then are nurtured by this mom, will grow up to have good mothering behaviors. Same thing happens here, where if you take the babies that are genetically predisposed to be good moms, because their mom's a good mom, and they're raised by a bad mom, they will then become bad moms themselves. And you see this for like 3 or 4 generations, and not just in rats, you see it in humans, okay? So this is the Polish hunger strike that happened during World War II. And what happened was the food supplies to Poland were cut off. Or to Poland, Denmark. You guys, I'm so bad at history and geography. Anyway, the stress, the biology of it I'm good at. So what happened was people weren't getting food. They became so hungry and starving they would go and go to trash can lids and lick them because maybe there's food on them. They were that starving, okay? So anyone who is pregnant during this phase, their kids, even though their kids were then after they were born raised in an environment that had lots of food because the war was over and this country recovered, their kids were raised with a lot of stress responses in place already. So they were predisposed to high blood pressure. They tended to be there's not a lot of energy wasted, quote unquote wasted, on making the individual tall and beautiful, as you usually expect your people of Danish and Polish descendants. Or I guess it was Denmark. Anyway, they basically the biology gets changed if you're stressed out during pregnancy. The biology of the baby gets switched. Like, genes are turned on to make you survive stress. You might not live long, but you're gonna survive. So if your parents were stressed, or if your grandparents were stressed, it turns on genes that are normally silent in us that get us ready to handle stress. Okay, so we might handle fat in a different way. We might store fat in a different way, because what if we starve? Mom starved. What if we starve? And so it's not a great system if you're like then put into a nice, happy, healthy environment. You can't turn off those genes after you're born. But in evolution's eyes, well, but at least you're alive. So good enough. And so it's one of these things where you could be doing everything perfectly and still exhibit signs of a chronic stress response, and it's 1000% not your fault. It's all genetics. It's all biology. So what do you do in those situations? You just have to be really careful to do things that don't exacerbate your already stressed out conditions. Okay, let's talk about reacting to stress. So people experience the same stress very, very differently. And a lot of times previous exposure to stressful events can determine how you react to new stressors. Okay? So you can't look at someone and say, why are they freaking out? I went through the same thing and I'm not freaking out. Well, you don't know if whatever situation you are in, maybe you've already gone through something just as bad, and you come out the other side and you survive. Okay? On the other hand, maybe they've gone through something like this before, and it triggers their brain into, and people use that trigger word, and some people make fun of it, but it's actually very real, especially in cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. If someone has gone through a sexual assault and someone makes a sexual assault joke later in their life, that could trigger them to, their brain is suddenly like, oh my God, remember that bad thing that happened to you? It could happen again. Stress response, stress response, stress response. And so suddenly you are feeling the exact same emotions you felt when that original stress happened. Okay, so we can never look at how someone is reacting to a stress response and judge them. Okay, so sometimes, also, have you guys ever heard there's always ads for antidepressants that say, like, well, if you take this, some side effects may include sleeping problems, or not sleeping enough, eating too much, or having no appetite. Suicidal medications often can cause anti-suicidal medications often can result in suicide. And it's because we don't understand enough about the brain yet to be able to just throw something at it and it works in everybody, okay? So it's not like Advil where you just take it and you feel better. Even you probably know someone who reacts badly to Advil. It's just biology's complicated. It's just stress is different for every person, and different people have different levels of resilience to that stress, okay? So if you are going through hard things, just know that you are not a bad person as a result. And if other people are going through hard things, they aren't bad people as a result. You are not weak because you cry at a sad movie. Just because someone is with you and they don't cry, don't judge either side of that, is basically what that's saying. Okay, that is my dog's reaction to mud. Some people, so they get in mud, like the same amount of mud. Basically, this is an analogy for stress. Some people, the same amount of mud is not going to affect them as much as they do other people. Some people love mud, just throwing their whole bodies into the mud, okay? Whatever that stressor is. All right. Boop. Okay. So, let's go into resistance. So, the parasympathetic starts to turn on after the stress seems to be gone, okay? So, your body attempts to reestablish homeostasis. The stressor is gone. You need to get back to homeostasis. Now you're ready to be resistant to whatever that disease was that was stressing you out. You might feel really invincible for a while because you survived that thing, because your brain is rewarding you. Again, it's that reward system for having gotten through that stress, okay? You then start to go back to, you experience the stress, you got through it, you can deal with normal life and stress now in a new way, okay? Awesome. What happens so there's two options after you've had the stress, you've acquired some resistance, right? So, yeah, resistance. And then, depending on what happens next, you either recover or you become exhausted. And a lot of it is how you choose to deal with your stress response or what you're allowed to do. Okay, so during recovery, this is some kind of effective coping mechanism. I failed my test. What do I do now? Well, I'm going to study better next time. I'm going to go and I'm going to take a hot bath and I'm going to just let this slide off of me because I know I can always take another test. Okay? Your body is going to return to its pre-stress state, and that's it. Your body, you're done. Stress response over. It's done its job. Okay? In exhaustion, you fail the test, you freak out, you cause the stress response to come back, and then you're overloading that stress system again, and it becomes chronic. If you keep doing this, you can't return to that resting state. You don't go back to homeostasis, and you start to experience some of those chronic stress states. Okay? You see this. This is a lot of what those mindfulness apps are really talking about. Part of it is you just need to have a moment to sit and be calm. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but I have an Apple Watch, and it'll tell me, hey, you need to breathe, because what it's doing is it's reading my heart rate and my, I don't know if it can read oxygen levels, maybe it can, and what it's doing is it can say, it'll give me a little buzz if I'm getting really angry or something, and I have to stop and take a breath, okay, because again, this could be what saves you from having a heart attack later in life, okay? This could lead to, if you don't allow yourself to recover after a stressor, you could have emotional breakdowns, you could get ill. Okay? So what happens what kind of health problems do we see associated with stress? So there's what's called allostatic load. There's long-term wear and tear on the body from stress, such as it could either exacerbate conditions you already have, or cause new ones like high blood pressure and heart disease, irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of people have irritable bowel syndrome when they're really stressed out. Because imagine you're turning your guts on and off and on and off. When you're stressed out, you turn them off, and then you suddenly turn them back on, and your body's like, well, do I make more acid? I might as well get rid of that old food and get new food. Okay, so you start to get these problems. Gastritis is inflammation in the stomach and can lead to ulcers, which is dangerous. You can have migraines because your brain is not... We don't really understand what's happening with migraines, but we do notice that there is, and I say we like I did the research, I just mean I read about it. We noticed that... stress can trigger a migraine, and it could be that one part of your brain that's like trying to get you aware of the stress gets activated and is trying to talk to other parts of the brain, and it overloads it and you get a migraine. We see this a lot in college students, anxiety, depression, and sleep disorders, because you are just always so stressed out from your course load, plus your job load, plus your home life, plus family, plus social, etc., that you trigger that stress response too often, and then if you don't cope with it well, you start to get these kind of disorders. Women especially, well, I guess women exclusively, if we think in a binary system, even though it's more than that, will start to develop menstrual irregularity. And ulcers you can either have ulcers already, or they could be irritated by stress, because you're turning your stomach acid on and off and on and off, and that can irritate your stomach lining. All right, psychoneuroimmunology. So this is just a study of how your nervous, endocrine, and immune systems interact. So basically, if you get stressed out and then you start to get sick, what happens? Okay, so one way to tell if you're too stressed is if you start to have diarrhea or indigestion. If you start to feel really, really sleepy, just like you can't stop being tired, or if you just can't sleep, like, why have I been awake? Sometimes I sit in bed at night when I have insomnia, and I just realize I have been laying and staring at the ceiling for 3 hours, and I'm gonna go crazy, and that's insomnia, and it's because I'm so stressed out. I stress myself out even more, and then I really can't sleep, okay? If you have trouble concentrating, that not only can lead to more stress, but it's a sign that you're too stressed anyway. If you're irritable, you can become accident prone because your muscles are so tense, you aren't really in control of a lot of your body. Because those muscles are tense, you can get tension headaches, back and shoulder pain, and you can get sick, okay? And a lot of times this can also lead to, all of these things can lead to drug abuse, because drugs tend to, again, activate that dopamine response, which makes you feel better, okay? So, what happens? Chronic stress, it lowers immune functionality. So if you're stressed out for too long, your body's like, dude, we've turned on the immune system for so long and it's not working. We're done. We have no more immune cells to give you. If you're going to get sick, you're more likely to get sick when you're stressed because your immune defenses have no ammo anymore to throw at illnesses. Okay? That's what I just said. Okay. Let's talk about... Boop, boop, boop. Okay, so personality types. You may have heard people referred to as a type A personality, but there's actually... I don't want to go into this in too much detail because this is a lot of psychology and that's not my major field, but as humans, we like to classify everything, and it comes from this same idea of stress where is it dangerous, is it not dangerous? Can I eat it, can I not eat it? Can I make babies with it, can I not make babies with it? Well, we're more complicated than that now as a social species that has laptops and desks, whatever. I'm just looking around the room. So we now, sometimes people get classified into one of 4 personality types, okay? So and we're not always going to be stuck in one personality versus another, but you often, when people are stressed, you see them start to go into one of these types, okay? So people who are considered type A are very competitive and controlling, impatient, aggressive when they're stressed, okay? People who are type B tend to be the more resilient type, who, well, if they're stressed, well, they want to think about why they're stressed. They don't let it stress them out too much, okay? They, type C, you're anger suppressives, you're, people who are very depressed are either going to fall into type C or type D, depending on if they become irritable or not, okay? But, again, this is situational. Some stresses will cause us to become type A, others will cause us to become type C, etc., etc. Okay. Let me check something real quick. Okay, good. We're not too far from the end. Okay, so hardiness is how, it's a kind of optimism, basically. So if you're an especially hardy individual, you see stressors as an opportunity for change or growth, okay? So someone who's very hardy is like, let's go. Give me more stress. I want to learn from it. Another aspect of emotional well-being is resilience. So somebody who is... they react, but they don't, but recovers quickly, or they know that a stress is going to cause them to grow from a situation. It's basically just how you approach a stressor. So if you know that, so for example, I don't know if I talked to you guys about, but my mom died when I was in graduate school. Before graduate school, I was very, very, very type A. Every little thing would set me off, and I was very competitive. Everything was the worst. I was going to beat everybody. Then I went through the worst stressor of my life, which was my mom being in a car accident. After that, after I dealt with all of that and my dad being in the hospital as a result and like taking care of my family because no one else was there around, now things don't stress me out as much because I realized at the time I was very, very depressed and I was going towards, am I going to go down the path of suicide or drug abuse, or am I going to try and make myself healthier, okay? So I had this choice, and that is a form of privilege. Being able to have the choice is a bit of privilege. But as a college student at NPC, you have that privilege, which is nice. You can go and seek help, okay? So now, years and years later, I, over time, built up this resilience where if something bad happens, I will sit back and say, well, but you know what? It's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So let me think about how I'm going to handle it. Okay, so that's a kind of resilience. I know, again, just like how I was saying, you can't judge people for how they react to stresses. I know someone who, if a friend of his is having a bad day, he goes into a panic attack because he has very, very little resilience and he has very, very little hardiness. And so that, again, everyone is individual in that, but these are things you can work on. Okay, there are other things that influence emotional and behavioral responses. Cultural background, if you come from a culture where you can turn to your family for support, that's fantastic. You can talk to them about your stressors, especially if you're in a culture where you say over dinner, everyone talks about their day and very openly, and you complain and you get it out. You feel like you're ranting, but not really, because you're just sharing, and if you offload that stress, it's not going to bother you as much. Other cultures, you don't talk about things like that. You never get that close. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. But if you internalize that stress that way, it can become a chronic stressor. Okay? Different genders react to different stresses in different ways. We'll go into that later. Again, your experience can change how you react to stresses. Whoop! Yeah, there, let's keep going. Uh, and again, perception can very much change how a stressor is perceived, okay? Because again, stress is all, it happens in the brain first. So if you know you're going to have a test and you psych yourself out for it to be, it's not going to be that bad. It's just a test. It's fine. You're going to handle that test stress much differently than if you say, oh my God, I have a test. I'm going to fail it. What if I don't what if everything, oh my God, you freak out. I can't even like think of how, a brain might, it just, you freak out, you can't handle it, then you're going to handle that stress in a much worse way, okay? Personality and temperament, again, will control emotional responses, and this is something that you might not be able to control, but you can know that that's something that's going to happen. Because behavioral responses are within our control. There was this story I heard on a podcast where, I think it was Radiolab, where this guy knew that anytime he got too angry, his stress response was to fight. He would just get in really bad fights to the point where he would black out and he would wake up and he had gotten in such a horrible fight that there was blood everywhere. He had no memory of it happen. He just would suddenly become so aggressive that he would hurt people. And so when he could feel his stress response turning on, he would tell himself under his breath, don't worry about it. Don't be angry. Take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And just as a side note, and so when he would do that, he would start to calm down because he was focusing on being okay more than he was focusing on, or just not focusing and becoming stressed out. Now, as a side note, this guy had a pet parrot that he would take with him everywhere because he was a parrot guy. Okay, and so he noticed that, anytime he gets stressed out and know that he was about to go into a rage and punch someone again, he'd just start saying, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And then one day he heard his parrot doing it. He heard his parrot saying, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And he realized before he even knew he was about to get angry, his parrot figured it out first. And automatically started going into that behavioral change, which caused him to not be stressed. Okay, so this is kind of an extreme example, but there are ways that we can trick our brains into not getting stressed out. And that is that behavioral response that we can keep within our control. Okay, so our personality may not be something we can change, but how we react to stress can be. Okay, so again, if you can take a situation and talk about it, if you can laugh about it, those are things that are going to decrease your stress. There is a report that actually just came out, I think, this week that talks about how exercising and hot baths can actually decrease the stress effects that lead to depression. And even just deep breathing. If you can take in a deep breath and so you take in the deepest breath possible, and then you realize you can actually take in a little bit more breath, and then a little bit more breath. While you're focusing on that, your stress response turns off, because your body's like, your brain says, if I can just sit here and take this big stupid breath, obviously the lion's not eating me, and it turns your stress response off for at least that moment. And the more times you can do that, the less stress you're going to experience. Alright, so let's talk about managing stress. How can we be healthy in this way? We've kind of alluded to some of this. It's really important to have social support and communication, so talk to someone about your stress. Exercise might be the last thing you want to do when you're feeling fatigued, but exercise actually increases the neurochemicals that are involved in decreasing stress reactions, so that's important. Eating really healthy provides, and again, this is one of those things, you want to just eat a cupcake and have a beer when you're really stressed out, but that's not healthy, and if you're in a stress response especially, you're just going to store that sugar badly. So if you have a healthy diet, you're less likely to have a bad stress response. Getting enough sleep and not oversleeping is really important in managing stress. And time management. If you know your test is tomorrow, if you have, let's say, you have a quiz in this class that's due next Monday. Don't wait until Sunday night at 2 a.m. to take that quiz. Take it as soon as you're done studying. Okay? Start studying as soon as you're done with this lecture. And don't wait until the very last second because you're kind of freaked out. Our brains can freak us out just by thinking about that thing that might be scary. And then just by thinking about that thing that might be scary, you go into a stress response. If you do that enough times, you can have a heart attack. So time management really helps us to avoid a lot of that. And that's easy for me to say. I'm recording this lecture at the very last second. I'm going to tell you that now. It doesn't always work. Okay, what else can you do? You can, like I was saying, mindfulness apps are really popular right now because they work. So if you can do what's called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where if you're experiencing a stressor, you just think about why, well, if I know if I do this thing, it's going to stress me out, then you actively, constructively do something else instead. So it's not necessarily think about why you're stressed out, it's do something else that doesn't stress you out. Okay? That can help you take control of a situation. You may not always be able to problem solve, but if you, just don't, and it's, again, a lot of people recommend that sometimes people will look at a problem, a stressor, and just give up. Okay, but that's not going to help your stress response and your stress levels. So problem solving will definitely help you to manage your stress. Okay? And again, modifying expectations. You might be so stressed out because you know, oh my God, I need to get the best job ever right now. Well, that doesn't mean you should go out and apply to be the CEO of Apple. Okay, you may or may not have that experience, right? So modify your expectations so that you can do something within your levels, I guess is what I'm trying to say, so that your stress is not so bad. Okay. And it seems silly, but stay positive. If you keep your brain in that positive mindset, you're less likely to go into a stress response. And sense of humor. There's something about evolutionarily about having a sense of humor and letting yourself laugh about things that decreases stress. Why? I don't know. People are doing research. I don't know what it is. And always remember to focus on what's important. At least people say, well, but you have your health. Okay, well, you don't if you stress out so much because you're thinking about your health that you end up getting sick. I'm going to let you guys go through this on your own. There's so many different ways to decrease your stress levels. So I'll just put this on the website. That I don't think that we need to go into it. We can talk about one thing you might be doing if you're taking data and analyzing things to change a behavior is to take a stress journal. Okay, so if you're writing down every time you get so mad about something, then you can look and see, like, well, how did I react to this stress? Okay, so if you have a power outage at your dorm and you can't study, you could rage and get so mad. Or you can do something, like that's just going to be stressful. If you do it, especially if you do it by yourself, you're going to build up that stress response. If you can do something else instead, then you'll be less stressed out. And you might be able to then look back through your day and say, oh, well, then all these things happened, and instead of doing this, I should have done something else. Okay, so that's that aspect of data and analysis. Okay. That's where I'm ending. Okay, guys, thanks for hanging with me till the end here. And again, I'm going to post the quiz to these chapters either tonight or tomorrow, and everything is due Monday morning by 8 a.m. And then that night I'll post, or maybe I don't know, we'll see. On Monday I'll post the next lecture, which I believe is diet and exercise, but I am not sure. Have an amazing weekend. Bye.